Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm Dan, and this is Forlorn Hobbies.
Hello and welcome back to the channel. Now, today's video is a reflective one, inspired by Tim's recent videos on starter sets and start collecting for black powder. And whilst I agree with all of his arguments and his suggestions, it kind of got me thinking a lot about the suitability of the starter sets that are out there. And as a kind of veteran hobbyist, perhaps I often overlook quite, nitpicky kind of things that are in the starter sets because I just wouldn't get them. But I thought that I would reflect on whether I kind of felt that the needs of a new hobbyist were being met by the starter sets that are out there for black powder. Now, before I go into further detail on my thoughts on black powder specific starter sets, in general, I think starter sets are a great way and an entry point into this hobby. Now, I'm not going to wax lyrical and endanger my audience by thinking that I'm going to become 40k wargaming like Tim, or even Assyrian wargaming, which I would be quite happy to follow if he decided to make that move. But I think there's a clear distinction with starter sets, which Tim excellently argued, that the starter set's core purpose has to have more than one meaning of just getting cool toys or miniatures. It has to serve the purpose of being able to teach you an abundance of rules. Not all the rules, but enough rules in a way that means that it is a stepping stone towards playing the whole game. Now, the 40k starter sets, Warhammer starter sets, over the years, even thinking of more recent starter sets I've seen, such as the Baron's War starter set, all have enough things in there to take you through each phase of the game with a variety of different rules kind of sprinkled in for good measure. And they do this really well. Now, black powder, in my opinion, is a completely different kettle of fish when it comes to wargaming. It's not because it's a hard game to master. It's a relatively easy game to kind of get into, to know. The main barrier point for the game is not the rules, but the amount of miniatures that is required to play the game and the space available with like board sizes, etc. Now, skirmish games are excellently marketed for a starter set with 2 factions with a handful of models, a couple of units each, that you can buy with a friend and maybe buy a copy each, so you get double of your chosen faction in that game, and that takes you a good way towards building your army. You might want to add a couple of extra boxes, or like in say 40k's example, a tank or 2, and it might not be the best army, but it's a well-rounded army that is good to go. Now, in contrast, black powder is a game on a much wider level. The units, or miniatures should we say, involved, you're looking at hundreds just for a small game. Now, unit wise, I think you can break black powder down to the bare minimum. You will need 7 units. That's to have 2 brigades of infantry of 2 battalions, two cavalry units, and an artillery piece to get the most out of the rules. Now, that might seem like a lot. Now, I'm not saying go out and buy or build 24, 36-man battalions. You can easily break it down so that you go, right, I've got a base of 8 figures, that can be a unit. Or, there's my cavalry, it's a 6-man squadron. That is fine to learn the rules. But when you're looking at the starter sets that we have available, now I'm going to be quite broad with the term starter sets because I'm not just referring to the Waterloo box for the Napoleonic games, Napoleonic era. I'm looking at the starter sets for nation specific in general, which I think have mixed kind of pros and cons about. So, in the Waterloo starter set, which Tim has used as a starting point, I think it has one major flaw. Now, the flaw for me is I don't think that it gives you enough for both sides to be able to learn the rules efficiently. Now, they have all the elements. They have infantry, it has artillery, it has cavalry. But you're looking at how the mechanics of the game with brigade orders, how different brigades interact. If you fail an order, you cannot proceed. Now, you could do that with individual units. But for me, that's not really the full spirit of the game. Now, I think in order for the starter set, for the Waterloo starter set to work, well, you would need to purchase additional boxes to supplement it. So I think if there was a bundle that sold the Waterloo starter set and a British and French late 1815 kind of starter box as well together, that would give you a much more balanced approach and would allow you to play the game and get the most out of learning the rules and seeing that kind of synergy on the tabletop. Now, the downside of that is that it can be overwhelming from a kind of new hobbyist perspective. All that grey plastic that you've got to clean up, build, sort out. You just want to get your toys on the tabletop. And I think that is a very big kind of red flag for potential hobbyists, especially not necessarily those that come over from different systems, but looking at it from, let's say, someone that's really interested in that period of history. They've played Empire Total War, Napoleon Total War, etc. Then they go, oh, actually, I've seen these pictures on the internet. I want to play this game. And then they see what they need to do, what they need to buy, what they need to paint. And they're like, oh, I don't have enough time for that. So they would probably go on and play a more low kind of skirmish level game like Sharp Practice or something like that, which, great. But this is Black Powder specific and that I'm kind of reflecting on. Now, that's one way of making it better is to kind of look at different scales. And I'll get onto that later on in this discussion. But at the moment, I'm just focusing on 28mm scale. Now, obviously, Black Powder itself covers a wider period than just the Napoleonic Wars. And primarily looking at Warlord Games because they are obviously the company that produces Black Powder. The starter sets are quite similar if they have them. So you've got the Waterloo one. I think there is an American War of Independence one that they do as well. I think you've got a Zulu War one, although I think that I've kind of discarded that from this kind of reflection because I don't think it's necessarily a starter set. It's more of a collector's kind of thing for Rorke's Drift. Now, just looking at the contents, I think the Waterloo one is in big need of reinforcements to work properly. But the American War of Independence one, I think, has a lot more legs. It seems to kind of naturally enable you to have a bit more of that synergy immediately, but obviously it has an increased model count. Now, I think both sides get 4 battalions of infantry, and then they don't have cavalry in it, but they have kind of the Indians and some kind of riflemen that add a different unit and type of kind of special rules dynamic to that game. Now, the big downside of that box is not the contents, but the cost, because it is almost, well, it's over 3 times the amount of the price of the Waterloo box set. Now, if you were to add the starter sets that I'd suggested, like the army boxes, to get more out of that Waterloo box, you're probably looking at about a similar level of investment. So I will make the comparison between them at that kind of level, where I think they both give you about the same kind of understanding of the rules. Now, you'll get light infantry skirmishing knowledge rather than cavalry knowledge, but these are little things that can be added on top of it, which isn't as big a stretch once you've got your head round the mechanics of the game. So if someone said to me, what would I buy to start Black Powder? I don't think I would recommend the starter set as a starting point. Now, there's a very big caveat here as to whether you are doing it as an individual project or as a project with a friend. Now, I think I look at historical games as more of a kind of an independent thing. Yes, you play other people, but your primary kind of motivation for getting into this kind of area of gaming is not to play your friend or to play this other person. It's born of a genuine interest in that period of history. Now, that said, there is a very kind of limited interest in some areas amongst people. So hobbyists often have to do both sides of the the battle and provide the miniatures and put on like kind of demo games at their clubs. Now, if I was following that approach, I would 100% recommend Tim start collecting approach, where you start with the Waterloo box set and you build both sides up from there to put on like a game at the club to get people interested. But if I was looking at it from a specific kind of singular motivation of your own interest, I wouldn't recommend the starter set. I would just say get a rule book. You can find them quite cheaply on eBay or secondhand, and start with the sets that build it up for you. Now, this isn't a start collecting X, Y, and Z video, so I'm not really going to go into that in much detail, but the army boxes, my suggestion would be buy 2 of them for your faction. You have your core infantry, some cavalry, some artillery. You just need to add a little bit of flavour, and it doesn't really require much more of an investment over that. But this is where I want to look at the parries in comparison to Warlord. The parries do, I mean, they could probably be updated now because they do a lot more plastic hits, but they do a lot of quite good army bundles where it's literally just a couple of their boxes. They give you some with command thrown in. Now, for my Austrians, I've bought a couple of those bundles because it's been cost efficient, and it's given me the core of what I need for my army. But obviously, I don't get rules with that. Again, I'm an experienced gamer, so it didn't really matter to me because I already had the rulebook. But the main thing I wanted to draw the comparison for, I think one of the first plastic kind of big sets that they did was their American Civil War game in a box, which I think for Black Powder, until quite recently, I think it was probably one of the better starting boxes. Now, I don't necessarily have that much of a deep interest or knowledge of the American Civil War, but when I look at the starter set, it was, I wouldn't say it was perfect, but it had the terrain in it, like a little bit of terrain to give you a bit of a pop up and go battlefield. It gave you 8 battalions of infantry if you went with their recommended sizes, which means that you could have 4 per side, which gives you the 2 brigades of infantry that I think minimum you need to be able to play the game and use the mechanics well. It also gave you some cavalry and some artillery that there was enough that you could break up so both sides had it, so you could have the act and react point of the rules and the mechanics again on the tabletop, where the Waterloo starter set did not. It was just one side gets this and one side gets that as a kind of balance. And the only thing missing from that was the rulebook, because obviously Perry's is a separate company from Ward. But I think from a 28 mil perspective, you couldn't go far wrong by putting together a box using the kind of principles set out in that set. It was an army, or 2 armies, that were finely balanced, that will enable you to learn the mechanics and interaction on the tabletop. Now, you could easily kind of turn that over into, let's go back to Napoleonics. You could add another battalion or 2 to each side of infantry, put in some more cavalry, and have a gunner side. It's not that much harder. Would I pay more for that in a box? Yes. It wouldn't necessarily need to be an excessive increase. It could be a good focal point. To build your collection around. Now, what I think Warlord have done really well with their epic ranges is to kind of address this imbalance from a collector's and also a new player's perspective, because they released their American Civil War epic box, which was great. It had a lot of units per side, but again, it was a very overwhelming box for a new player. It had both sides, it had a rulebook, it had some terrain, it ticked all the boxes, But for one person, the scale of that, kind of in terms of unpainted plastic, could be very intimidating. And I think they learned a perfect lesson, whether it was intentional or not, when they got to Waterloo. Because they released the box sets for army specific. So they have a French one, they have a British one, and a Prussian one. All of them contain a standalone army in it with some terrain. The army has artillery, cavalry, battalions of infantry. That is all you would need to play a game. Now, you could pick up both of them yourself, or all three of them, depends on how you roll. But all you would have to do as a new hobbyist is buy one with a friend. So you buy the British and your friend buys the French. You take it home, you prep the minis, they can slot in to the bases, and you could play with them straight away. You don't have to think about painting them. That can come with time. They are produced in coloured plastic, red for the British, obviously, blue for the French, black for the Prussians. So they, just by that alone, there is a distinction that can help you engage with them on the tabletop. You have an army that allows you to use all the mechanics of the game as intended, with very little effort, with kind of building, with purchasing. You can obviously add things that you want, a bit of flavour, like some Highlanders or the Old Guard, for example. But straight out of the box, you could have a good game of Black Powder with that one box. Or, well, two boxes with your friend. Now, I would like to see more of that kind of approach with historical gaming in general for Black Powder and beyond. I think Hail Caesar have done it really well as well with their Hannibal boxes. But the only obviously issue is for me is that I've been a long time player. I will look at 28mm as the starting point because that was the standard when I started into this kind of area of the hobby. Now, I look at the releases, I wish they'd expand on the ranges that they do rather than keep going to different areas. So I would much rather see an Austrian starter army, a Russian starter army, a Spanish starter army for Epic before they moved on to American War of Independence, for example. And so in that sense, there's a lot of frustration, missed opportunities. But I think fundamentally, the structure that they have directed towards in their Epic scale can only be a good thing for Black Powder. And I would say it's probably the best approach for the game. Now, obviously, if you're looking at recreating that on a 28mm scale with the contents of the boxes, it's going to have an astronomical cost. So I don't necessarily think it's viable to do it for that scale. But I think if they were to kind of narrow that down to the minimum, maybe have 6 units, as I've said before, increase the price, I would much rather buy that to get into the game with a rulebook in it than the starter set available, because it creates a lot of questions that you don't really want to have to ask when getting into a new game. Because it shouldn't be, oh, I need to add this, I need to add that, I need to add that. You would want to do that, obviously. But when you are just learning the game, you want a box set that you can just pick up and go and put it on the tabletop and learn all the rules. So that is why I think Warlord have done a great kind of job with the epic ranges, because that is literally all you need to do. All other aspects of the hobby are obviously still present, but you just buy the box, take them off the sprue, pop them into the bases, and they are ready to go to be able to play. Now, going back to Games Workshop days, you would obviously buy your models, build them up, spray them up, paint them, and then play with them, or just play with the plastic. But there was a lot of prep work involved. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't care about your minis or not clean them up, but you could literally just snap these off the sprue, pop them in the bases, and play the game. And then, as you're learning to play, you can then take your unit, take them off the bases, clean them up properly, spray them, paint them, all the while still being able to learn and play the game. You don't have to wait for all those stages, especially when it comes to multi-basing. I will buy an army for black powder, and it will quite often be years before that army is ready for the tabletop, because I have to paint everything first. Even on a battalion scale, let's say I'm just painting a battalion of Russians. I'll paint maybe a base a week. Now, I need 6 bases to be a battalion. That's nearly 6 weeks, maybe even 2 months, just to get that battalion ready to play the game. Now, if I was a new gamer, that sustainability would not work, because by the time I've done all that, depending on how dedicated I am to it, I might get bored and go, what's the point of this? I've painted 1 battalion in 6 weeks. I've then got to paint another 5, or another 3, another 5 units, just to be able to play the game. That's 6 months worth of work just to get it on the tabletop. Now, obviously, that's based on my paint process. I'm sure there's many people out there that can churn that out in a weekend. And that's not saying that they don't care about their painting. They might just have a gift where they can sit and paint continuously, uninterrupted, for hours and produce good results. But, just looking at it, even if you only spent a month painting, would your interest hold for that month for you to get ready for a game? Now, looking at video games, for example, you come home, open the box, put the disc in, or even download it from the store, and you're good to go in maybe an hour. And even that hour feels like you're sitting around wasting time waiting. So I think, the epic version is probably the one thing that I would recommend for new starters. Now, it's not necessarily going to be everyone's cup of tea, because they might want to play in 20mm or 28mm. But looking at the mechanics of the game, the levels of investment, I think if you and a friend wanted to dip your toe in that rule system, picking up a box each in today's kind of hobby expenses, it's not overly a huge investment. It requires a lot of work by the time putting everything into it. Whereas if you were to go out and buy a 28mm army, it's probably going to cost you 3-4 times the amount that you'd spend on that box, and the prep time would be a lot longer. And whereas you and your friend could go home, get them on the tabletop that night, play with them, and still be able to paint them, do what you want, hobby time, over a period of time. without kind of having to wait for anything to happen before you started your journey in the game. Because you could play that and then go, oh, I don't like these rules. And if you'd gone out, played it that night, you haven't really invested that much time in it. Whereas if you'd spent a couple of months painting everything, building everything, played the game and gone, oh, that sucks, there's a lot more at stake for your enjoyment in that kind of game. Now, the good thing about historical gaming is obviously that there is a multitude of rule sets available now, so you can shop around. But I think that kind of principle of time investment, regardless of the rule set for the miniatures, yes, you're going to put the work in, but you want to have a kind of rule set that you're happy with before you make that commitment. So you could buy this starter set. There's nothing stopping you from going and buying Soldiers of Napoleon and playing that game with the Epic set. There's nothing stopping you from downloading Valor and Fortitude or whatever the Perry's one is and trying that out, because it's mini agnostic games. But getting yourself in a position where you can start to do that, you want that to come first, and then the hobby to kind of come over time. You don't want to feel that extra pressure of having to get everything done just to see if you enjoy it, rather than the other way around, where you can enjoy the game and then enjoy the hobby kind of stress-free. So thinking about the questions that initially triggered this kind of thought process, what starter sets do I want to see? And I think the simple answer after this is I don't really want to see starter sets for the sake of seeing starter sets. Like, I would love to have a Vagram box with the Austrians and the French, or Borodino, Russians and French, because it's always going to be French against someone in the Napoleonic Wars. And whilst that's great, I don't necessarily think that until they change the direction, now they could make it a bigger scale, would I pay a lot more to have a better size box? Yes, I would. Because I think as long as it would be able to stand alone as a good entry point to the game, I think it would be financially worth it, rather than just going, oh, here's a Borodino box, here's 2 battalions of Russians, 3 cannons, here's some French with some cavalry. Like, that's just going, oh, look, shiny box. It doesn't really enhance the game, or even as an entry point to the game, in my mind. Whereas looking at the epic ranges, it's actually something that I would be like, no, I would love to see that, because you could be like, here is a Russian army for Borodino. Here's looking on the basis, it could follow the same approach. You could have artillery, infantry. You'd have a good kind of division almost of Russians in that one box, which is all you would need. And you could turn up and play the French box with your friend, and it would be great. You could have some themed terrain like they've been putting in the Waterloo boxes. You could maybe have some redoubts, or with Vagram, you can have the significant kind of terrain that was present there. Maybe some pontoon bridges or something, or the mill houses and the granaries. But that's the kind of thing that kind of got me thinking. I would love to see themed bundles, but I don't think, especially for 28mm, that it's workable unless there is a dramatic change away from that kind of Games Workshop starter set mentality that Warlords have tended to have when it comes to 28mm. Now, don't get me wrong, it works really well for bolt action because it's a skirmish game. It doesn't necessarily work as well for black powder, but they have shown that they are able to make something with their epic ranges that really works for black powder as a gaming system, and that by going down a more slimlined one side box set. So that's it for today. I want to thank you for bearing with my ramblings, but I just thought it would be good to kind of get my thought process, as scrambled as it is, out there to maybe kind of offer a different approach, should we say. Now, Tim has been going on about his Assyrians too much lately, so I thought I would add a little sweetener for him, because currently I do not have any biblical or ancient armies to play with. Not necessarily through lack of interest, because it is an area of history that I am very enthusiastic about. More from a kind of lack of finding a kind of range that kind of, gets my hobby enthusiasm going. So if we can get to 300 subs, I will pledge to start a biblical themed army for Hail Caesar, so that the Assyrian Wargaming channel can come into life. So I'll leave that with Tim, and hopefully he can get to play with his Assyrians one day. Anyway, I will catch you all in the next one.
Thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. Until next time, enjoy your hobby.